The weight of the gold card seemed impossible as Grace Whitlow held it in her calloused hand. The sleek rectangle caught the fluorescent lights of the Coal Dynamic Fuels conference room, almost mocking her with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Beside her sat two other women who'd also received identical cards. Piper Lane, the venture attorney whose tailored suit probably cost more than Grace's monthly rent, and Brooke Turner, the regional TV anchor whose face smiled from billboards across Bozeman. Archer Cole leaned against the mahogany table, his Australian accent softened by years in Montana, but still present in the rounded vowels. You have 24 hours. Spend as much or as little as you want. No limits, no questions asked. His steel gray eyes moved deliberately from one woman to the next. Just show me who you really are. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Grace tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, glancing at the floor-to-ceiling windows where the first white sheets of snow were beginning to erase the mountain skyline. The Weather Service had been screaming warnings all morning. Record-breaking blizzard, whiteout conditions, power outages probable. She'd left her son Eli with May Caldwell, the retired ER nurse who knew how to manage his cold-induced asthma better than anyone. Why us? Piper asked, her lawyer's precision cutting through the moment. What's the actual objective here? An excellent question, Archer replied, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the credenza behind him. A young woman with his same sharp features and an infectious smile. Grace had heard the rumors. His sister June, dead 5 years now from some preventable tragedy that had left Archer guilt-driven and reclusive. Let's just say I'm at a crossroads. The three of you represent something I need to understand better. In the doorway, Victor Harlan appeared, the company's CFO, all polished approval and expensive cologne. Generous experiment, Archer. I hope it yields the insights you're looking for. His smile never quite reached his eyes. Static crackled from the radio clipped to Grace's belt. Sheriff Ben Carter's voice cut through. Grace, you copy? Ranch roads are going to close within 3 hours. If you're planning any runs, do them now. She pressed the transmit button. Copy, Ben. I'm on it. Brooke leaned forward, her reporter's instincts firing. This feels like more than a personality test. Archer's expression softened for just a moment, a private tremor that told Grace this man was carrying weight none of them could see. Sometimes what we choose reveals more than any interview ever could. He straightened, the moment of vulnerability vanishing. The clock starts now. As the three women filed out into the hallway, wind rattled the glass behind them. Grace clutched the gold card like a tool, not a ticket. Piper was already gaming outcomes in her head, seeking clarity on liability. And Brooke sensed a story bigger than the feel-good segments that had built her career. Outside, the storm was coming. Inside, something else was beginning. The snow intensified as Grace pulled her battered Ford pickup into the lot of Mountain Valley Rentals. The gold card felt like a live coal in her jacket pocket. She'd spent the drive calculating generator units, diesel reserves, shelter capacity. Not luxuries. Lifelines. I need your largest refrigerated box truck, she told the clerk, a kid barely old enough to shave. And I'll take delivery of 6 portable generators, industrial grade. The kid's eyes widened at the gold card. Ma'am, that's going to run. I don't care what it runs. Can you have it ready in 30 minutes? Across town, Piper Lane sat in a hastily arranged conference call with 3 emergency logistics attorneys. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, drafting temporary easements for right-of-way plow corridors. I need satellite internet kits, 50 units, delivered to the following coordinates. She rattled off addresses for remote ranches and the volunteer fire station. Bill everything to this account. The gold card had already processed 2 retainers that would make most lawyers salivate. But Piper wasn't thinking about billable hours. She was thinking about how power reconfigured systems when paperwork was weaponized fast enough. Brooke Turner stood in the cramped studio of Valley Voice Radio, her cameraman looking bewildered as she signed contracts. Charter the radio repeater on Mount Ellis. I want backup generators here, at the hospital, and at the county dispatch center. She met his confused stare. This isn't about ratings, Tom. If the power goes out, we're the only voice people will have. The gold card slid through the reader without hesitation. 30 miles away in his corner office, Victor Harlan made a phone call. Reroute the fuel deliveries to the Billings depot. Yes, all of them. Safety precaution during the storm. He listened to the protests on the other end. Bill, I'm the CFO. I'm telling you it's a safety measure. We'll redistribute after the weather clears. When he hung up, his smile was thin and satisfied. A local fuel shortage would make Archer's little experiment look like reckless negligence. Damage now, blame later. Grace's box truck rumbled to life just as the first power blink blacked out half of Main Street. She'd already called May Caldwell, who'd agreed to be on standby with her decades of triage experience. Grace's next stop was the Pine Ridge Motel, where she cleared every available room for stranded families. Whatever they need, she told the bewildered manager, handing over the gold card. Heat, food, medical supplies. Keep receipts. Piper's satellite kits began arriving as volunteers assembled them on rooftops between gusts. The work was brutal, fingers going numb, but each unit meant another household could call for help or coordinate rescues. Brooke's emergency broadcast clicked alive just as the plows ground into whiteout conditions. Her voice, calm and precise, became the valley's compass. Route 89 is impassable south of Livingston. Alternate shelter available at Pine Ridge Motel. If you need assistance, call this number. The gold card purchases were stacking up, each swipe a decision that prioritized utility over optics. Grace moved with battlefield calm, delegating, triaging, calculating fuel burn rates with the precision of someone who'd stretched every dollar her entire life. Piper discovered she could trust Grace's gut over perfect paperwork. Brooke surprised herself by caring more about saving lives than capturing footage. Victor Harlan watched it all unfold from his heated office, quietly satisfied. The fuel shortage he'd engineered would hit in 12 hours. By then, it would be too late. Roads vanished under 2 feet of powder in 3 hours. Grace stood in the Pine Ridge Motel parking lot, wind screaming around her, and realized the building was too exposed for an overnight deep freeze. The old structure leaked heat like a sieve, and if the power went down for real, they'd have 30 people in a death trap. She pulled out her phone and called the Paradise Valley Rural Electric Co-op. This is Grace Whitlow. I need you to clear every delinquent propane bill on your books for residential customers in a 20-mile radius. She read the gold card number twice to be sure they had it right. And I need it done in the next hour. The line went silent. Ma'am, that's over 200 accounts. Then you'd better get started. By dusk, the box truck had made 3 runs, picking up stranded families, seniors who'd lost heat, and a young couple whose car had slid into a ditch. May Caldwell met each arrival with hot coffee and a practiced eye, sorting who needed immediate attention and who could wait. Piper's satellite kits were operational, creating a mesh network that connected ranch hands, medics, and plow drivers. Sheriff Ben Carter issued a travel ban exemption for Grace's convoy after Piper filed the emergency paperwork with brutal efficiency. You're learning to trust your gut, Grace told her as they refueled the truck. I'm learning to trust your gut, Piper corrected, but she was smiling. Brooke's voice on the radio coordinated everything. Rancher Conway, Plow 7 needs a path cleared to the Miller homestead. Medic unit, we have a possible cardiac event at the following address. She'd found her cadence. Inform, calm, mobilize. No drama, just clarity. Sheriff Carter shifted from rule-bound to results-driven, dispatching deputies to escort fuel trucks and supply runs. Whitlow's got a better command center than I do, he admitted over the radio. But Grace wasn't satisfied. The motel was a stopgap, not a solution. She needed something more resilient, something that could weather the next 2 days if the storm refused to break. A call came in from Tyler Brooks, Coal Dynamics security engineer. Grace, I've been digging through county records. There's an abandoned cabin on higher ground, 12 miles up Sweetwater Road. Stone hearth, intact chimney, sits above the wind line. If you can reach it and claim it, it might be your best bet. Grace stared at the static-filled radio, then made her decision. Get me the owner's contact information. I'm buying it. While gusts screamed through Paradise Valley, Grace sat in her truck with a title agent who'd answered her call from his living room. The cabin's been abandoned for 8 years, he said, squinting at his laptop screen. Owner lives in Seattle, inherited it from family. You really want to buy it sight unseen in the middle of a blizzard? I really do. The gold card processed the deed transfer in 17 minutes. Grace didn't have time for inspections or negotiations. She paid asking price plus 10% for immediate digital closing. Tyler Brooks verified the property chain of title remotely, then sent a cryptic message to Archer. The cabin on Sweetwater Road just transferred. You should know. Grace assembled her caravan in the motel parking lot. The box truck, 2 pickups, and a snowcat borrowed from a rancher who owed May Caldwell his daughter's life from a winter 20 years past. Scout, May's Australian Shepherd, rode shotgun in Grace's truck, alert and preternatural calm. 12 miles in this? Piper asked, staring at the wall of white beyond the headlights. 12 miles to safety, Grace corrected. They crawled up switchbacks at 5 miles per hour, Scout occasionally pressing his nose to the window, as if scenting the path ahead. May rode in the truck bed with 2 teenagers who'd volunteered to help, all of them wrapped in thermal blankets. The cabin materialized like a ghost. Stone foundation, steep roof shedding snow, windows intact behind wooden shutters. Grace killed the engine and sat for a moment, exhausted beyond measure. We made it, Piper breathed. Inside, the hearth was dry, the timber stacked along one wall still usable. May snapped into triage mode, assigning shifts, posting a medication log on the wall, setting up cots with military precision. Scout kept the handful of kids corralled near the fire, his steady presence a comfort. Grace explored the cabin room by room, checking for structural issues, and found a loose brick in the chimney. Behind it, a hidden cubby held a roll of papers sealed in plastic. She pulled them out carefully, spreading them on the rough table. Penciled maps, margin notes, diagrams of energy systems, and supply chains. At the bottom, a name, June Cole. Grace's heart stopped. This was Archer's sister's cabin, the place she dreamed and planned before she died. And Grace had just made it public property. Archer Cole arrived at the cabin an hour later, snow-blasted and shaken. He'd driven through conditions that should have killed him, Tyler's message looping in his mind. The cabin on Sweetwater Road. He stood in the doorway, staring at families huddled by the fire, kids drawing pictures on scrap paper, May Caldwell checking vitals with practiced efficiency. This was June's hideaway. The place she'd disappeared to when she needed to think, to plan, to dream about a world where power didn't concentrate, but distributed like water, finding its level. Seeing it warm with life froze him. Grief and relief collided, leaving him rigid in the doorway. You must be Archer, Grace said quietly, stepping beside him. She held the rolled papers. I'm sorry. I didn't know this place was yours. It was my sister's, he managed, his accent thickening with emotion. She died here. Not in this room, but nearby. Medication spoiled during a heat outage. She was trying to get to town, and he stopped, unable to finish. Grace handed him the papers. Then maybe she'd want you to see this. A small voice interrupted. Uncle Archer? Ruby Cole, Archer's 8-year-old niece, appeared from the back room where she'd been sleeping, Scout at her heels. She held a folded map that had been wedged deeper in the chimney cubby. Mom left this too. Archer knelt, taking the map with trembling hands. June's handwriting covered every margin. Sketches of a community energy trust, supply chain failsafes, governance structures that distributed decision-making authority instead of hoarding it. She wanted this place busy, Ruby said simply. She told me once that empty places die, but busy places grow. Grace watched Archer's armor crack, the grief finally finding a channel. Then Eli, her 7-year-old son, started coughing, a wet, harsh sound that Grace knew too well. She grabbed his inhaler, but Archer was already moving. Here, mate, he said gently, kneeling beside Eli. Breathe out first, all the way. Now press and breathe in slow. Hold it, good lad. His hands were steady, his voice calm, the technique learned the hard way through loss. Eli's breathing eased. Grace met Archer's eyes and saw not a billionaire, but an uncle who had failed once and could not fail again. Thank you, she whispered. Archer nodded, still holding Eli's small hand. Around them, the cabin hummed with life, generator purring, firewood crackling, quiet voices planning the next shift. June's place alive again. Tyler's next message arrived on Archer's phone, brief and devastating. Every dollar spent is moving voting shares. Grace's cabin purchase just tipped the threshold. Victor will know by morning. Archer stared at the screen, then at Grace, then at the families she'd saved with bold, unflinching purchases that had inadvertently triggered the smart contract he'd built but never had the courage to activate. June's plan was unfolding, and it terrified him. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the frozen past was beginning, finally, to thaw. Victor Harlan launched his countermove at 4:47 a.m., while most of the valley still slept under blankets and generator hum. Private security vehicles, unmarked SUVs with men in tactical gear, positioned themselves at key intersections along the fuel convoy route. The memo he drafted was already in select board members' inboxes. Reckless experimental spending during crisis conditions. Founder judgment compromised. Immediate intervention required. But Tyler Brooks hadn't slept either. The security engineer sat in his apartment, 3 monitors glowing in the darkness, watching the smart contract logs update in real time. Every purchase Grace, Piper, and Brooke made was time-stamped, geotagged, and immutably recorded on a blockchain Archer had established years ago but never activated. Until now. Tyler's fingers moved across the keyboard, anonymizing the data, packaging it into a format a reporter could understand. Then he sent it to Brooke Turner with a single line. This is what's really happening. You have 30 minutes before Victor shuts it down. Brooke's phone buzzed on the makeshift broadcast desk she'd set up in the cabin's back room. She read Tyler's message twice, then opened the attached files. Her journalist's instincts fired immediately. This wasn't just a story. This was a controlled demolition of consolidated power. She went live at 5:15 a.m., her voice cutting through the static of emergency radio. This is Brooke Turner with Valley Voice, and I have a story that will redefine what we think we know about coal dynamic fuels. Every dollar spent on those gold cards isn't just charity or publicity. It's triggering a smart contract that transfers voting shares from a single owner to a public trust established in June Coal's name. In his downtown office, Victor's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Brooke continued, her delivery crisp and unrelenting. The cabin currently sheltering 43 Valley residents, purchased outright and designated for permanent community use. The propane bills keeping 200 families warm, cleared through a trust mechanism that prioritizes human need over profit margins. The satellite network coordinating rescues, built with resources that are literally moving power from boardrooms to living rooms. Calls flooded the station. Ranchers who'd received fuel. Families whose propane had been mysteriously reinstated. Medics who'd used the satellite network to save lives. May Caldwell's voice came through, steady and authoritative. I've worked Montana winters for 40 years. What Grace Whitlow did with that card in 24 hours would have taken our county emergency services 2 weeks to coordinate, if they'd coordinated it at all. Piper Lane, listening from her laptop at the cabin's kitchen table, made a decision that would end one career and begin another. She opened her secure drive and pulled up the emergency injunction she drafted at 2 a.m. Then she called the 3 attorneys she'd retained with the gold card. File it now, she said. Emergency motion to enjoin private interference with disaster relief operations under Montana Code, annotated 10-3-104. Cite the county's declared emergency status and the documented life-saving interventions. I'm serving Victor Harlan personally within the hour. Sheriff Ben Carter was already awake, listening to Brooks' broadcast while suiting up. He made 3 calls, 1 to his deputies, 1 to the county attorney, and 1 to Grace. How many trucks do you need escorted? He asked. Grace looked at the convoy manifest she'd been building since 3 a.m. 6. Fuel, generators, and medical supplies. Victor's people are going to try to stop us. Victor's people are going to learn about obstruction charges, Ben replied grimly. I'll have 4 units ready at first light. At the cabin, Archer sat with Ruby on the stone hearth, Scout's head resting on the girl's lap. They'd found more of June's papers in the cubby. Sketches, calculations, a manifesto written in margins. Power belongs where the weather hits hardest, where people know the cost of cold and the value of warmth. Not in towers, not in portfolios, in hands that build fires and share blankets. Mom knew, Ruby said quietly, tracing her mother's handwriting with one finger. She knew someone would have to actually do it, not just plan it. Archer felt something inside him shift, a frozen mechanism finally thawing. She was braver than I've been. You gave them the cards, Ruby pointed out with a child's clarity. That was brave. Grace appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion and determination. Tyler just confirmed the share transfer thresholds. My spending alone moved enough equity to trigger the trust's activation clause. Victor can't override it, but he's going to try. Archer stood, his decision made. Then we make sure he fails. Piper arrived from the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, and gave Archer a curt nod. Injunction filed. I need you to testify that the gold card experiment was intentional and authorized. On record. Now, I'll do better than that, Archer said. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. Convene an emergency board meeting for noon. In person where possible, satellite link for the rest. And make sure Victor knows he's expected to attend. Brooke's broadcast continued, weaving together the technical details of the smart contract with the human stories of rescue and survival. She played audio from a rancher whose snowcat had helped clear the path to the cabin. Grace Whitlow spent that card like someone who's known cold and hunger. Every dollar went to keeping people alive. That's not reckless, that's righteous. As dawn broke, gray and furious over Paradise Valley, two forces prepared to collide. Victor's carefully constructed narrative of corporate responsibility versus the messy, vital truth of distributed power in action. Scout lifted his head, ears pricked. Somewhere in the whiteout, engines were starting. Night pressed against the cabin windows as lantern light glowed over cots and the quiet breathing of exhausted families. Grace, Archer, Piper, and Ruby gathered around the rough kitchen table. June's penciled map and notes spread before them like sacred texts. Ruby recognized her mother's shorthand immediately, the abbreviated codes June had used in her engineering journals. See this? She pointed to a clause written in the margin. Trigger equals public good plus irrevocable commitment. Reset only via 2/3 trust vote. Piper leaned closer, her lawyer's eye parsing the language. This mirrors the smart contract's fail-safe exactly. If the spending meets certain criteria, public benefit, permanent infrastructure, community access, the shares transfer automatically. There's no corporate override mechanism. Archer read his sister's words aloud, his voice rough. Power belongs where the weather hits hardest. He looked up at Grace. You bought the cabin outright. You cleared propane bills for 200 households. You didn't rent or lease anything. You made irrevocable commitments to public infrastructure. I bought what people needed to survive, Grace said simply. I grew up in trailers across this valley. I know what it means when the propane runs out and the temperature drops to zero. Tyler's voice crackled through the satellite link Piper had set up. I can confirm the blockchain triggers. Grace's receipts qualify as public good purchases under every parameter June programmed. The cabin purchase alone moved 17% of voting shares to the trust. Combined with the propane payments and the satellite network Brooke funded, you're at 62% transfer. Piper did the math instantly. That's controlling interest. The trust now has majority voting authority on any emergency operations decisions, which means Victor can't unilaterally redirect fuel shipments or override community resource allocations, Archer added. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between grief and relief. Grace stood, pacing to the window where she could see the dark shapes of families sleeping under donated blankets. We need to formalize this. Make it permanent. If the trust controls the shares, it needs a structure, bylaws, community seats, audit protocols. I can draft that, Piper said, already opening her laptop. Governance framework with rotating community representatives, transparency requirements, and protection against capture by any single interest. Archer watched her work, then looked at Grace. You stepped into policy without flinching. You didn't ask permission or wait for consensus. You just did what needed doing. Someone had to, Grace replied, and you gave me the tool to do it. Ruby spoke up, her voice small but certain. Mom would want the cabin to be the first resilience node. That's what she called them in her journals. Places where power, real power, like heat and food and medicine, could be stored and shared when everything else failed. The term settled over the room like a blessing. Resilience node, not a shelter or a charity station, but a permanent piece of infrastructure designed to distribute survival. Piper's fingers flew across her keyboard. I'm adding that to the charter. The June Coal Community Trust will establish and maintain resilience nodes across regions vulnerable to climate emergencies. Community-controlled, transparently audited, permanently committed to public access. Tyler's voice came through again. Brooke's broadcast just announced the fuel convoy leaves at first light. If you can get through Victor's blockade, you'll have delivered enough diesel to keep the valley operational for 2 more days. That'll give you time to finalize the governance structure before the board meeting. Archer met Grace's eyes across the table. I built this company to prove renewable energy could work at scale. But I was still holding all the power myself, just like the systems I thought I was replacing. June understood what I didn't, that distributed energy requires distributed authority. You're understanding it now, Grace said. The question is whether you can live with it. Archer looked down at his sister's map, at the careful pencil lines connecting nodes across a theoretical valley that was now very, very real. I think I have to. For June. For Ruby. He gestured at the sleeping families. For all of this. Scout patted over and pressed his nose into Archer's hand, the dog's steady presence a wordless endorsement. Ruby smiled. Mom always said Scout knew who to trust. Outside, wind chimes began to tinkle as the wind shifted. The storm was breaking, and with dawn would come the convoy, the confrontation, and the choice that would make all of this either permanent or pointless. Brooke's voice drifted from the radio in the corner. If you're listening out there in the dark, know this: power is moving. Not just electricity. The power to decide, to allocate, to prioritize. It's moving from one man's desk to a trust that carries a dead woman's dream. And tomorrow, we find out if that dream survives contact with the people who want it buried. Grace, Archer, Piper, and Ruby worked through the night, drafting documents by lantern light while families slept and Scout kept watch by the door. By the time the first gray light touched the windows, they had a governance framework, a legal defense, and a convoy ready to roll. The valley was about to find out what distributed power looked like when it fought back. Pre-dawn blue turned the snowfields to steel. Engines rumbled to life in the cabin clearing. The box truck, 2 diesel tankers borrowed from sympathetic distributors, Sheriff Carter's lead vehicle, and the snowcat bringing up the rear. Archer rode shotgun in Grace's truck. Scout sat alert between them, ears pricked toward the pass where Victor's hired security waited. Grace checked her mirror. Behind her stretched the convoy that would determine whether the trust lived or died. Fuel for the co-op tanks, generators for the clinic and broadcast hub, and enough diesel to keep the valley's emergency services running for 48 hours. They'll try to stop us at Miller's Pass, Sheriff Carter said over the radio. Narrow road, easy to block. I've got 4 deputies in position and Piper's injunction in hand. But if they want to make this ugly, it'll get ugly fast. Then we make sure it's legal ugly, not violent ugly, Piper replied from the second vehicle. She'd printed 12 copies of the emergency injunction and had her 3 retained attorneys on standby via satellite link. Brooke's voice came through on the broadcast frequency, live and steady. This is Valley Voice. The Coal Dynamic Fuels Community Supply Convoy is departing Sweetwater Cabin at 6:14 a.m. route, Sweetwater Road to County 540 to Miller's Pass. Estimated delivery time to Bozeman Co-op, 8:30 a.m. We'll be with them every mile. The convoy descended through switchbacks carved into mountainside, the road a white tunnel between 10-foot drifts. Scout's nose pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. At Miller's Pass, 3 black SUVs blocked the road. Men in tactical gear stood beside them, radios clipped to their vests. They didn't look like private security, they looked like mercenaries. Sheriff Carter's vehicle stopped 20 yards out. He stepped into the frozen air, 6'2" of Montana law enforcement in a sheepskin coat. Gentlemen, you're blocking a county road during a declared emergency. That's a misdemeanor obstruction charge at minimum. I'm asking you once to move. The lead security contractor stepped forward. We have orders from Coal Dynamic Fuels CFO Victor Harlan to secure this route against unauthorized resource movements. Piper emerged from her vehicle, papers in hand. These movements are authorized by Emergency Statute 10-3-104 and by the controlling shareholder of Coal Dynamic Fuels, the June Coal Community Trust, which as of 2/17 this morning holds 62% of voting equity. Here's your injunction. You have 3 minutes to clear the road or face contempt charges. She handed copies to each contractor with the precision of someone who'd won courtroom battles on procedure alone. The contractors exchanged glances. Their leader pulled out a phone, stepped away, then returned stone-faced. We're getting clarification from Mr. Harlan. "You've got 2 minutes," Sheriff Carter said. Then Scout's ears went flat. He whined low in his chest, staring not at the blockade but at the ravine to the north. Grace followed his gaze and saw it, a wisp of exhaust, barely visible against the snow. "There's a vehicle off-road," she called. "Scout, show me." The dog leaped from the truck and plunged into the snow, Grace and Archer following. 200 yards into the ravine, they found a pickup truck buried to its windows, the engine still running on fumes. Inside, a young couple and an infant, all three hypothermic but alive. "Get May on the line," Archer shouted, pulling open the door. He lifted the baby with practiced care, tucking her inside his coat. Grace helped the mother while Archer guided the father. By the time they reached the road, Sheriff Carter had maneuvered his vehicle to block the contractor's view while his deputies ushered the family into the convoy's medical supply truck where May waited with blankets and warm fluids. The lead contractor's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then motioned to his team. "Stand down. Mr. Harlan says let them through." But as the SUVs moved aside, Tyler's voice crackled urgently over the satellite link. "Grace, Victor just filed an internal motion to override the smart contract. He's claiming force majeure, arguing the emergency conditions invalidate the transfer. Board vote is at noon. If you don't get that fuel delivered and documented as trust authorized, he might have a case." Grace gunned the engine. "Then we'd better not be late." The convoy rolled through Miller's Pass as the sun finally broke the cloud line, turning the snow to blinding white. Brooke narrated every mile, coordinates, estimated arrival times, the rescue of the family Scout had found. Calls poured in, gratitude, offers to help, ranchers asking where to deliver hay for stranded livestock. They descended into Paradise Valley proper at 8:22 a.m., 8 minutes ahead of schedule. The co-op tanks stood empty and waiting. Grace backed the first tanker into position while Piper handled the paperwork, documenting every gallon as trust-authorized disaster relief. A crowd had gathered, volunteers who'd heard Brooke's broadcast, families Grace had sheltered at the motel, ranchers whose roads the satellite network had helped clear. They formed a human chain to offload the generators, passing them hand to hand to the clinic entrance where the night shift doctor wept openly at the sight of backup power. Archer stood apart, watching. He'd spent 15 years building a company that ran on his decisions, his risk tolerance, his vision. Now he was watching power distribute itself in real time, loud, messy, profoundly democratic. It terrified him. It also felt like the first true thing he'd done since June died. Scout sat at his feet, tail wagging slowly. Ruby appeared beside her uncle, slipping her small hand into his. "Mom would be so proud of you," she whispered. Archer looked down at her, then at Grace directing traffic with the authority of someone who'd earned every ounce of trust the valley placed in her. "I'm not sure I did anything. I just got out of the way." "That's the hardest thing," Ruby said with a wisdom beyond her years. "Letting go." Brooke's voice rose over the crowd noise. "Fuel delivery complete. Generators operational. Scout the dog is officially a hero. And in 4 hours, a corporate board will decide whether to honor this redistribution of power or attempt to claw it back. Stay tuned." The convoy had made it through. Now came the harder battle, the one fought with bylaws and votes instead of diesel and determination. The board convened at noon in the Coal Dynamic Fuels conference room, generator-powered lights humming overhead. Half the members attended in person, stone-faced executives in wool suits. The rest patched in via the satellite network Brooke had funded, their faces tiled on the screen. Victor Harlan sat at the head of the table where Archer usually presided, his presentation already loaded. Financial projections, risk assessments, legal opinions on force majeure. Motion to nullify the experimental share transfer due to extraordinary circumstances and failure to follow standard corporate governance protocols. Sheriff Carter stood at the back of the room in full uniform, present as both witness and warning. May Caldwell sat in the observer section, hands folded, her mere presence a rebuke to anyone who'd questioned the medical necessity of Grace's actions. Archer entered last, carrying June's annotated originals and Piper's filed documents. He took a seat, not at the head of the table, but in the middle beside Grace. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Before we vote," Archer said quietly, "you should hear what actually happened over the last 36 hours. Victor bristled. "We're all aware of the unauthorized spending. It wasn't unauthorized, Piper interrupted, standing. The gold card experiment was a lawful exercise of ownership authority, explicitly designed to trigger pre-established trust mechanisms. Here are the blockchain logs, time-stamped and immutable. Here is June Cole's original trust instrument, filed with the Montana Secretary of State 8 years ago. And here is the emergency statute that grants broad discretion during declared disasters. She distributed packets to each board member with surgical precision. Tyler Brooks appeared on one of the satellite screens. I can walk you through the technical implementation. Every trigger was intentional. Every threshold was clearly defined. The smart contract executed exactly as designed. Designed by whom? Victor demanded. This board never approved. Designed by June Cole and implemented by me at her request 7 years ago, Archer said, his voice steady. I was the sole shareholder then. I had absolute authority to establish a trust mechanism. I simply lacked the courage to activate it, until now. Grace stood, and the room fell silent. She wore the same work jacket she'd had on for 2 days straight, her hair pulled back, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. But her voice was clear. I didn't buy status. I didn't buy influence. I bought time. Time for families to stay warm. Time for medics to reach patients. Time for this valley to survive a storm that would have killed people if we'd waited for proper channels and standard governance protocols. May Caldwell added from her seat. I treated 7 cases of hypothermia, 3 cardiac events, and 1 pediatric respiratory crisis in 36 hours. Every single patient is alive because Grace Whitlow moved faster than bureaucracy allows. If that's not proper use of emergency authority, I don't know what is. Brooke's voice came through the broadcast link she'd set up to the lobby where 100 Valley residents had gathered to listen. Should I play the calls? The rancher who credits the satellite network with saving his herd? The mother whose propane was restored in time to keep her disabled son's medical equipment running? The volunteers who? That won't be necessary, one of the board members said, an older woman who'd been silent until now. I've read the trust instrument. I've reviewed the spending logs. The question isn't whether Ms. Whitlow acted properly. It's whether we as a board have the legal authority to override a properly established trust mechanism. Exactly, Piper said. And the answer is no. The trust owns 62% of voting shares. It has controlling interest in any emergency operations decisions. Victor's motion isn't just improper. It's void on its face. Victor's composure cracked. You're advocating for mob rule. For turning a billion-dollar company over to the community it was built to serve, Archer finished. Which is exactly what my sister intended. What I should have had the courage to do years ago. The silence stretched. Then the older board member spoke again. I move to recognize the June Cole Community Trust as controlling shareholder per the executed smart contract. Further, I move to formalize the governance framework Ms. Lane has drafted with community seats, rotating audits, and the Resilience Node program. Second, another board member said immediately. Victor stood. This is corporate suicide. This is corporate evolution, Archer replied. And it's time to vote. The vote was 7-3, with Victor and 2 allies dissenting. The trust stood. The shares transferred. Power redistributed. In the lobby, a cheer rose from the gathered residents. Brooke narrated the moment with unusual restraint. The board has voted. The trust is recognized. What began as a Blizzard survival story has become something else entirely. A proof of concept for what happens when those who know scarcity best are given the tools to fight it. Victor Harlan stood, gathered his papers, and walked out without another word. His resignation letter was on Archer's desk within the hour. Ruby slipped into the room and handed Grace a folded paper. June's map with Scout's paw print in one corner where the dog had stepped in charcoal from the cabin hearth. Mom's dream has feet now, she said simply. And pause. Grace looked at Archer, who managed a smile that was equal parts grief and hope. She'd have liked you, he said. June always trusted people who knew how to fix things with baling wire and determination. Then she would have liked this valley, Grace replied. Because that's all we've ever had. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, something new was beginning. Sun-on drifts turned Paradise Valley into a study in white and gold. The cabin on Sweetwater Road steamed gently, its chimney smoke rising straight in the still air. Inside, Families ate hot stew prepared by a rotation of volunteers. Kids drew pictures in Ruby's sketchbook. Scout featured prominently, often with cape and crown. Grace stood on the porch with Eli, who breathed easy in the cold air, his inhaler tucked safely in his pocket alongside the action figure Archer had given him. "We're going home today," she told him. "But this place will always be here if we need it. Will you still be in charge?" Eli asked. Grace smiled. "No one's in charge, buddy. That's the point." Inside, Archer signed the final documents that formalized the share transfer triggers. Tyler had walked him through each clause, each irreversible commitment. The June Cole Community Trust now held 68% of voting equity, with the remaining 32% converting to a public benefit structure that prohibited any single stakeholder from holding more than 5%. "You're giving away your company," Tyler said, not quite a question. "I'm giving it a purpose," Archer corrected. June built the blueprint. Grace proved it could work. "I'm just the guy who finally stopped standing in the way." Piper sat at the kitchen table with 3 community representatives Grace had recruited, a rancher, a retired teacher, and a clinic administrator, drafting the first Resilience Node governance manual. Decision-making authority rotates quarterly. Financial audits are public and posted within 30 days. Any community member can propose a new node location with a petition of 200 signatures. "What about funding?" the rancher asked. 5% of Coal Dynamic Fuels' annual revenue goes directly to the trust, Piper explained. That's contractually locked. The company can't reduce it without a 2/3 vote of trust members, and the trust membership is majority community-elected seats. The retired teacher whistled low. "That's real money. Not grant crumbs, real infrastructure money." "That's the point," Piper said. "Real power requires real resources." Brooke stood in the doorway filming what would be her final Valley Voice segment before taking a job as senior investigative reporter at a regional news cooperative. 3 days ago, a man gave 3 women a card and a challenge. Today, a community trust owns the state's 3rd-largest renewable energy company. A valley survived a blizzard that should have killed dozens, and a new model of distributed resilience is being drafted in a cabin that was abandoned and forgotten. She turned the camera on May, who was packing up her medical supplies. "Final thoughts, May?" "I've lived here 63 years, May said. "I've seen boom and bust, fortunes made and lost, people who had everything and people who had nothing. This is the first time I've seen power move toward the people who actually need it. If it holds, if it spreads, it'll change everything. And if it doesn't hold," Brooke pressed. May smiled. "Then we'll build it again." That's what resilience means, not avoiding the storm, but knowing how to rebuild after. Sheriff Carter stood by his patrol vehicle, talking quietly with Archer. "Victor left town this morning. Took a consulting job in Houston. I don't expect trouble, but I'll keep an eye on things." "Thank you, Ben," Archer said. "For everything." June would have, his voice caught. Ben gripped his shoulder. "She'd have been proud of you, mate, for finally trusting her vision." Ruby appeared with Scout at her side, carrying a brass plaque that had been machined overnight by a local fabricator. June Cole Memorial Resilience Node. Established 2025. Power belongs where the weather hits hardest. "Can we put it up now?" she asked. The ceremony was small and perfect. Grace held the plaque while Archer drilled pilot holes into the cabin's stone facing. Ruby handed him screws one at a time, and Scout sat patient as a sentinel. When the plaque was secure, Eli read the words aloud, slowly and carefully. "Mom," he said, tugging Grace's sleeve. "Does this mean we did something important?" "This means a lot of people did something important together," Grace replied. "And that's better." Brooke filmed the moment, then turned her camera to the valley spread below, ranches and roads, the co-op tanks full again, plumes of smoke from 100 chimneys. This is Valley Voice, signing off with a question for anyone listening. What if power always belonged to the people who knew what cold felt like? What if that's how it was supposed to work all along? As families began packing to return home, as trucks rumbled to life and kids shouted goodbyes, Archer found himself alone on the porch with Grace. The silence between them was comfortable, the silence of shared exhaustion and earned respect. "What will you do now?" Grace asked. "Stay on as technical advisor to the trust," Archer said. "Ruby and I are building a house up the valley. Something small. Something that doesn't need so much space between us and the people we're supposed to serve." Grace nodded. And if another storm comes? Then we'll have more nodes ready, Archer replied. Because you taught me that resilience isn't something you plan for in boardrooms. It's something you build in communities, one bold decision at a time. Scout barked once, sharp and joyful, and took off running through the snow. Ruby chased after him, laughing, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. The sound of a child's laughter in June's cabin was the finest monument Archer could imagine. As the last truck pulled away, wind chimes began to tinkle. New ones Grace had hung that morning, made from salvaged materials by a local artist. The cabin door stood open to the valley, a standing invitation to anyone who needed warmth, shelter, or simply a place where power was measured not by concentration, but by distribution. The storm had passed. The work was just beginning. And for the first time since June's death, Archer Cole felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope that was rooted in action, not abstraction. Below the cabin, Paradise Valley stretched toward mountains still crowned with snow. Somewhere in town, Piper was filing articles of incorporation for 3 more resilience nodes. Brooke was editing footage that would carry this story beyond Montana. May was training volunteers in cold weather tria. Tyler was documenting the smart contract architecture so other communities could replicate it. And Grace Whitlow, waitress and dispatcher and architect of distributed power, was driving home with her son. The gold card returned to Archer, but its legacy encoded in blockchain and community trust, and the simple truth that what we do with unearned power reveals exactly who we are. The end and the beginning. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.